Good morning, everyone. It's an honor to be here, of course, with my distinguished Vice Chair, Catherine Clark. This morning, we revealed some additional information about the House Democratic Issues Conference that will take place in Virginia, starting on Wednesday, April 10th, running through Friday, April 12th. The Issues Conference will be themed 100 Days in Fighting for the People. Over the 100 days that will conclude on that Friday, April 12th, House Democrats will have worked on lowering health care costs, strengthening the Affordable Care Act, increasing pay, largely through both passage of the Paycheck Fairness Act, as well as ensuring in negotiating an appropriations agreement that hardworking public employees at the federal level will receive a long-deserved 1.9% salary increase. Of course, we continue to work on our infrastructure plan. Committees have held hearings on that issue and will continue to do so as we move forward. And we, of course, are fighting to clean up corruption, bring our democracy to life through passage of H.R. 1, designed to try to get unregulated money out of the political process in the era of voter suppression and deal with the out-of-control special interest influence peddling racket that exists here in Washington, D.C. At the Issues Conference, we're pleased that we will be joined by Jerome Powell, the chairman of the Federal Reserve. Kara Swisher will also deliver a keynote address. She's a prominent tech journalist and host of Recode Decode, a very popular podcast. We will hear from labor leaders, including Mary Kay Henry, president of SEIU, Lee Saunders, president of AFSCME, as well as Sarah Nelson, who is the president of the Association of Flight Attendants and a rising star within the labor movement. We'll hear from prominent journalists, as well as academics, including Arlie Russell Hochschild, who, of course, is the author of Strangers in Their Own Land, as well as Raj Shetty at a panel discussion that will kick us off, that will be hosted by our vice chair, Who Are the People, appropriately framing the entire discussion that we will have. Of course, we'll hear from John Legend and Chrissy Teigen. Don't want to bury the lead. And there will be other announcements that we will make moving forward. We're excited. We have robust attendance from all across the ideological spectrum within the House Democratic Caucus. It's going to be a great session where we can learn together, explore ideas together, develop what the House agenda will look like as we execute it for the people coming out of that issues conference, and just spend the time getting to know each other a little better, given that at least a quarter of the conference are new members. With respect to the issues that we continue to focus on this week, healthcare, and healthcare. It's clear that, once again, the Republicans have shown their true colors by attacking the ability of everyday Americans to be able to provide adequate, costly, accessible health care for themselves and their families. What's interesting about the events of the last week, where first you had the announcement that the Department of Justice, at the direction of Donald Trump, was seeking to get the Affordable Care Act declared unconstitutional. And then second, the president makes the point that we are not going to see the plan until after November of 2020. That tells you all you need to know. Now, Donald Trump says that he's a billionaire, but we have not seen his taxes. Donald Trump says that he's a stable genius, but we have not seen his grades. Donald Trump says that he has been exonerated, but we have not seen the Mueller report. Donald Trump now says that Republicans are going to be the party of health care, but we are not going to see his plan. I'm from Brooklyn. I know a hustle when we see one. Donald Trump is hustling the American people straight out of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. That's a shame. House Democrats are the only thing standing between more than 100 million Americans with pre-existing conditions losing their health care protection and the Republican Party. This will be the defining issue of the 116th Congress. We will also continue to work on the other pocketbook kitchen table issues connected to our For the People agenda. And in that regard, let me now yield to my good friend, Catherine Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning and welcome to Equal Pay Day. So this would be the day where my salary, I would have to work until this day to match Hakeem's salary for 2018. And my colleagues, Karen Bass as an African-American woman, Nanette Barragan as a Latina, Grace Meng as an Asian American woman, Sharice Davids as a Native American woman, would be weeks and even months later to get to this same point. But in Congress, we have transparency around our salaries and we get paid equally for equal work. That is what we want all Americans to have. That is why we passed last week the Paycheck Fairness Act and made sure that those increases in salaries go right into families' bank accounts at home, and that women have the same chance that we have in Congress to get paid equally for equal work. And talk about a hustle. We were just on the steps of the Supreme Court talking about President Trump's move to take away the ACA from all Americans. And the chairman talked about what that impact would be on families. But the thing that really struck me is that the president has said he'll reveal his plan for us in 2021. So it is the ultimate shell game. And what's at stake are devastating removal of health care for American families, rolling back those pre-existing condition protections, allowing our children to stay on our health care until they're in their mid-20s. All of these pieces that provide affordable, accessible health care, this president is saying only for the wealthy, only for those who can afford it. And we are going to, at the same time, take over $2 trillion in cuts to Medicare, Social Security, and Medicaid. The vision is clear for the American people, and it doesn't include American families who are trying to cover their families' health care needs in it. This is what the president shows us over and over again are his priorities. And we are taking up this week another strong priority of the American people and of women in this country, and that is reauthorizing the Violence Against Women Act. It is going to be an opportunity for our Republican colleagues to come together and understand that this is critical to making sure that every woman is safe in her home, that she's safe on the streets, that she's safe in her job. And we hope that we will be able to garner broad Republican support for this as well. It's fundamental. And what we see are these for the people agenda items, whether it's expanding health care, the Paycheck Fairness Act, making sure that we keep guns out of the hands of criminals. All these policies are starting to pile up at the Senate's door. And we have to make sure that we are sending that clear message. This is the agenda of the American people. It's not what we see coming out of the White House and this administration, but it is what the American voters are demanding, and the Democrats in this caucus are meeting it every single day. That was what we heard in the midterms. This is what we are delivering. And with that, we will open it up to questions.
Casey.
Mr. Jeffries, Joe Biden, there have been several women that have come out and said that he touched them in a way that was unwelcome. Do you think this should affect whether he gets into the presidential race?
Well, these are serious allegations. They've been raised by serious individuals, and they deserve a serious evaluation as to how Joe Biden should proceed. But that's a decision that he needs to make on his own.
I'm curious what your proposal is for the situation with migrants at the border. Do you support the Julian Castro plan to raise refugee quotas and end criminal penalties for immigrating to the country illegally?
Well, we are in the process of having a collective House Democratic Caucus-led discussion, inclusive of the leadership of the relevant committees, including Chairman Jerry Nadler, as well as Chairman Benny Thompson of the Homeland Security Committee. So I don't want to comment one way or the other on Julian Castro's proposal. What is clear is that, the president is in meltdown mode as it relates to the situation at the border. And Exhibit A of that fact is the notion that he would cut off aid unilaterally to the Central American Northern Triangle countries of Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. That is the last thing that we should be doing, because it is the humanitarian crisis and the security crisis in these countries that is leading to the migration patterns that we are witnessing at the southern border.
Does that exacerbate the problem in your view? Cutting off aid to those?
Cutting off aid would absolutely exacerbate the problem, and that is a sentiment shared by both Democrats and Republicans.
Can I
Catherine.
just add to that? Competing for the very worst of ideas is this idea of completely closing the southern border. And reports are coming out that we're beginning to see the administration move that way, pulling Border Patrol out of our ports, pulling them out of our ports of entry. There couldn't be a worse plan. Just when you think the wall was the very worst plan for addressing comprehensive immigration reform, the president this week says we're going to cut off potentially $2 billion of trade every single day that happens across our southern border, that we have ignored and put into place cruel separation policies that have been not only amoral but ineffective. And we're going to double down on that by closing our borders. This is a president who is veering from, amoral, not well thought out policies to very dangerous, destabilizing policies. This is a dramatic action. And just because we see outrageous policy ideas from this White House every single week, we have to stand up and pay attention to this. This is not good for our economy. This sends a terrible message about who we are as Americans, and we have to get back to how do we solve this problem? How do we make sure that we have comprehensive immigration reform that can, get us the judges and the personnel that we need, not only for national security, but to address migrants who are coming to this country? By saying he's taking away the foreign aid from the Central American countries and potentially closing our border are two huge steps in the wrong direction.
What about this idea that, I know you guys want the full Mueller report, but we're hearing that they have to do some heavy redactions here, and the idea that that it may look too redacted, therefore they send up kind of a memo on steroids, something that is not quite the report, but again, yet another interpretation. how do you guys get at that if they're going to follow the law, which says, okay, we have to protect methods and sources, intelligence stuff, but still get what you want if they send up something that is just kind of more of an amped up memorandum of that lasted a couple weeks?
Well, there are three areas for potential redaction. One, sources and methods. We agree that to the extent that intelligence, sources, and methods would be revealed in the Mueller report, that is a reasonable basis for redactions to take place. The second ground for potential redaction is grand jury material. Now, there's a presumption of privacy with respect to grand jury material, but that can be overcome when there is a compelling public interest. The attack on our democracy, led by Russian spies to sell out our democracy in order to try and artificially place Donald Trump at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, which 17 different intelligence agencies agreed was the case, is a compelling public interest, and we need the entirety of the truth in that regard. The third area of potential redaction relates to unindicted individuals who may have been part of the investigation. The case hasn't been made yet as it relates to what the Attorney General may do in that area, but he should pay attention to prior Republican precedent that was set in the last Congress related to Hillary Clinton, Andy McCabe, Lisa Page, and Peter Strzok.
But let me just follow up there, though. Aren't you guys sending two messages when you say, okay, protect the sources and methods, grand jury information, everything else, but give us the whole report, and Chairman Adler's deadline was today. Aren't those counter messages?
I don't think they're counter messages at all. I mean, the Attorney General seems to proceed with speed when he feels it's in the interest of the narrative that he wanted to project over the prior weekend when he issued that 4-page synopsis of what he believed to be in the Mueller report. We set a deadline for today. We'll see what happens by 5 p.m.
The Republicans are expected to bring up some kind of an MTR related to Israel to attach to your Yemen legislation. How do you keep this from turning into an intra-party fight within Democrats about Israel, similar to what happened when Ilhan Omar made some comments?
The overwhelming majority of the House Democratic Caucus is strongly pro-Israel, period, full stop. We're not going to speculate on what the MTR will be other than to know it will be a straight-up procedural gimmick.
Quick follow-up on Chad's question. How do you expect grand jury information simply not to be released in all of this without essentially breaking the law as far as Mueller is concerned? I mean, grand jury information is simply not allowed to be released, and I'm curious just your thoughts on this.
Well, that's an inaccurate statement of the law, in my view. There's a presumption of grand jury secrecy that one can be overcome by the judge presiding over the grand jury, as was done in the past, including as it relates to the Starr report. That presumption of grand jury secrecy can also be overcome when there's an overwhelming public interest, which clearly exists in this case.
You said that health care will be the defining issue of this Congress. Has the Democratic caucus itself defined what it wants in health care and how you proceed?
Yes, and I'm going to let Catherine respond to that as well, but we've been very clear as part of our For the People agenda. Our lead focus is on lowering health care costs, beginning with our effort to drive down the high cost of life-saving prescription drugs. We believe that in a country that is the wealthiest in the history of the world, no American should ever have to choose between putting food on the table, paying the rent, or getting access to the life-saving medicine they need to survive. That is why in the healthcare space, in addition to fighting to strengthen the Affordable Care Act and protect people with pre-existing conditions, given the relentless Republican assault, we will also be working on a bipartisan approach to driving down the high cost of life-saving prescription drugs. Question in the back?
Back here, please. Thank you. From both of you, I wonder if we could have your thoughts on this Scalise petition to discharge on the Born Again proposal. What do you make of it if Democrats end up some Democrats end up supporting that?
Yeah. Well, I didn't let Catherine respond to the prior question, so I'll let her respond on healthcare, but you also want to respond to this?
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm unfamiliar with the Scalise petition.
Ms. Clark, do you have any?
I also am unfamiliar with the Scalise petition, but I can tell you this. The Democratic caucus is overwhelmingly pro-choice. That is part of our plank, that we believe that those decisions are between a woman, her family, her doctor, and her faith, full stop.
Piggybacking on Chad's question regarding conflicting messages, this morning members of the Judiciary Committee said explicitly they don't want any redactions made, but it sounds like you're saying certain redactions should be allowed. Is that, I mean, those are not two different messages, aren't they?
No, I think Jerry Nadler has repeatedly said that he understands that to the extent that sources and methods from the intelligence community could be revealed in the context of the Mueller report, that would be an appropriate set of redactions. Beyond that, I think we're all in agreement that anything else would be subterfuge put forth to try to shield the contents of the Mueller report from the American people.
AOC, Ayanna Pressley, and Will Khanna have been critical of the D-TRIP's position change on working with consultants who are supporting or working with challengers. I'm curious if you can speak to the division that this has caused between in the caucus, and whether you think the policy change is a good idea.
Well, I support the notion that the primary purpose of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee is to elect Democrats in tough districts so we can either win the majority or hold the majority.
Mr. Chairman, can you talk a little bit about the decision to invite Chairman Powell to the retreat? What do you hope to hear from him about? And also wanted to ask if you anticipate any administration officials potentially attending, particularly on the topics of infrastructure, prescription drug prices, or the places where you guys think you can work with Republicans.
Well, at this point, we don't anticipate any participation from administration officials, but we're still about 9 days away from the issues conference. We'll see what happens moving forward. There's ongoing discussions with the Trump administration on a daily basis to figure out ways that we can work together, particularly as it relates to driving down the high cost of life-saving prescription drugs, as well as on infrastructure. The invitation to Chairman Powell speaks for itself. We obviously have an important role to play as it relates to fiscal policy. He has a tremendously important role to play as it relates to monetary policy, which will be essential to the future of our country and our economy, and members are excited to hear from him.
A follow-up on the DCCC question. Do you think that their new policies, does that still leave room for primary challengers, or are you concerned that that's going to push out new blood from entering the caucus?
Well, from the perspective of the House Democratic Caucus, we are in the midst of ongoing conversations because we embrace the notion that members can put forth different perspectives. But at the end of the day, the reality is the DCCC has a singular mission, which is to protect and preserve the majority. The stakes are high in that regard, and they relate to things like stripping away health care protections from more than 100 million Americans with pre-existing conditions. They relate to the situation on the border, where House Democrats have one perspective and the Republican Party clearly has a different perspective, somewhat anchored in the president's xenophobic tendencies. The stakes are incredibly high, which is why at the end of the day, the core mission of the DCCC is to make sure that House Democrats remain in the majority so we can continue to fight for the people. Catherine? Okay.
I would just add on that I have heard concerns, and we take those seriously. And I know there are ongoing meetings with concerned parties and DCCC, but the focus of this caucus is not on political consultants. It is on our ability to protect the vote. It's what we saw in H.R. 1, to make sure that it is accessible without barriers. And again, that is an example of one of the main planks of our For the People agenda that is just sitting at the door of the Senate. If we want to have open and free elections, Democrats are very clear-eyed. That starts with protecting the vote and getting Congress to be working not for special interests, not to be beholden to dark money and influence in our campaigns, but to have the American voter wield the power at the ballot box. That's why we passed H.R. 1 and made it our very first bill. And we urge the Senate to listen to that, to protect our elections going forward, and pass that bill in the Senate.
So one last question in the back.
Lieutenant Mark, you spoke about Democratic policies piling up on the door of the Senate. How do you keep that from happening when it comes to things like VAWA that have been bipartisan in the past?
You know, so far on VAWA, we have one Republican co-sponsor, Mr. Fitzpatrick from Pennsylvania. We would hope that our Republican colleagues are going to listen to their constituents, who understand that domestic violence, the kind of violence that women face, has nothing to do with their political ideology. This is about ensuring the safety and security of women in their communities, and all those children, men, also impacted by domestic violence. So we are hoping that there are bills where the Republicans can see past what's become a blinder's vision on protecting the president, and get back to looking at the families that sent them here and what they need to do to support them and to open up not only security, but also economic opportunities. That's what our agenda is for. That's why it's called For the People. And we urge, and will continue to urge, our Republican counterparts in the House and in the Senate to take up these bills.
I would just add, Mitch McConnell seems to constantly be engaged in the permanent campaign. We were sent to Congress fundamentally to govern on behalf of the American people, which in a divided government context requires us to work together to try to find common ground. We want to do that because we believe that the time to govern is right now. The time to campaign will be at some point later on in the 2020 cycle, and hopefully Mitch McConnell will be responsible in that regard on behalf of the people that he represents in Kentucky. Thank you.